When they shut the schools down, they created educational gaps, developmental gaps, social gaps that I don't think we're going to feel the brunt of for decades. I think the competitiveness of America in the world market is greatly compromised. I think it's going to cost millions of years of lives lost for this current generation of students. You know, if you're not reading on grade level at the end of the third grade, particularly for low socioeconomic strata and for minorities, the dropout rate is 6 times normal because they just never catch up. They then fall further behind in fourth grade, and in fifth grade, it really steps up where they start teaching grammar and you have to start kind of self-directing more. And the Department of Education in 2015 said that there were 32 million people that can't read above the fifth grade level, and that 19% of high school graduates can't read above the most basic level. The National Assessment of Education Progress said 32% of fourth graders and 24% of eighth graders aren't reading at a basic level. So whoever you're talking to said we weren't doing great going into this. And now we've created these levels, and that remote learning, particularly for those lower grades, didn't work. It just didn't work. So they lost a year and come back and feel intimidated now. So they fall further and further behind. That means they're going to get less of a quality education, which means they're going to get less of a job, which means they have poorer insurance in higher risk jobs, which create more injuries, slower diagnosis, poorer treatment, which creates those years of life lost. All of this just obtains 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and we're just not competitive. Something has to happen to close that gap. You can't just, because you don't see it right now, pretend it doesn't exist. And that's why we're seeing such high levels of depression, anxiety, stress, and loneliness, higher than have ever been registered before with these kids. And nothing is going to change it except getting in there and doing special reading programs and addressing the mental health of these kids. I read right when Apocalypse Never came out, critics were describing you as being a denier on climate change. They apparently didn't read the book. Nothing could be further from the truth. I read you as saying, absolutely, we need to pay attention to the climate. Absolutely, I am sensitive to that. I just don't believe what they're selling is going to help. That's the way I read what you were saying. I absolutely think we should attend to the climate and to the planet, just not with what you're peddling, because that's not working and won't work. I don't get it.
Yeah, that's right. It's a similar, the books are, I didn't really see it until I was finished with San Francisco, but I do see my two books are both arguing for human potential, for human resilience, for the old Rosie the Riveter, yes, we can spirit. That was when I self-identified as a progressive, that was the spirit of it that I took from it. It was about overcoming adversity. It was not wallowing in misery. Whereas if you look at it today, it's a kind of catastrophism, psychologically and otherwise. The idea that climate change is not something that we're going to be able to survive. That's absolutely absurd. The number of deaths from natural disasters has declined over 95%. In fact, the number of what gets counted as a disaster, because so few people die, has meant that we've actually had fewer natural disasters over the last 2 decades. Similarly, I see a kind of similar learned helplessness or a taught helplessness in the case of homelessness. So on the one hand, on climate change, we say, the Bangladeshis will never be able to survive the rising sea levels, even though the people of the Netherlands, in many parts of it, live 7 meters below sea level. And similarly, we say, those those people on the street will never be able to give up drugs, when, of course, millions of people achieve recovery from addiction every year. And so there's the denial that's occurring is the denial of human power and of human potential. And that's a real change from the best of the 1960s, of the best of Viktor Frankl, of his argument in Man's Search for Meaning, which is that mentality is everything, and a long way from the self-help, the human potential movements, which I think used to have a huge influence on liberal-minded people, but now I think among liberal-minded people, it's viewed as blaming the victim, to suggest that people can develop the mentality capable of transcending their circumstances.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And it's not blaming the victim. To empower the victim and to help them require more of themselves every step of the way. And to disagree with a particular plan doesn't mean to disagree with the primary objective. To ignore the advances in agricultural science that will take place between now and 2050 or now and 2100 and its counterbalancing effects, I don't know. It just doesn't seem helpful to yell fire in a crowded theater.
In both cases, too, I think it's a bid for control. I think that anxiety that I was describing among liberal-minded people in affluent societies, the way they seek to resolve their anxiety is by seeking to gain greater control over parts of the economy and the society that they should not be trying to control, whether it's around energy or food production or psychiatry or addiction care. It's this kind of ideologically driven demand for social control that I think has really posed a threat to these three pillars of civilization that I've been describing.
Well, I think there are good ideas on both sides of the aisle from progressives and conservatives. The objectives are important enough that we should all work together to find the best ideas from the best minds and work on all this together.